Now presidential leadership is not guaranteed. It is a choice. Biden, Harris, and the rest of the socialists will fundamentally change this nation. They want open borders, closed schools, dangerous amnesty, and will selfishly send your jobs back to China while they get rich. They will defund, dismantle, and destroy America's law enforcement. When you are in trouble and need police, don't count on the Democrats.
In much of the Democratic Party, it's now fashionable to say that America is racist. That is a lie. America is not a racist country. This is personal for me. I am the proud daughter of Indian immigrants. They came to America and settled in a small southern town. My father wore a turban. My mother wore a sari. I was a brown girl in a black and white world.
Hey everybody, thank you for joining me today. Alex Kapitko here for the Tonic Accord podcast. And as you can see, I need a haircut. I probably need to shave, but I'm trying to stay semi-sane during the pandemic, so, it's what it is. But anyways, I started off this segment today because I want to just kind of share with you guys my thoughts after the first two nights of the Republican National Convention. And I started with those two videos you saw. One was Kimberly Guilfoyle and the other one Nikki Haley, because I think they show a very stark contrast in the messaging in this convention. And I kind of consider this to be kind of a tale of two countries that somehow is happening simultaneously. Like Kimberly Guilfoyle here is kind of portraying the fear side. And it's really interesting for me to see how far she's gone. I remember like 10 years ago, this was a lady who was, a Fox News contributor, but she was kind of calm, nuanced, and conservative, normal. And I remember also when she was with Gavin Newsom, who is now the governor of California. So now she's with Donald Trump Jr., and they seem to both be drinking the Kool-Aid. And honestly, whatever they're drinking, I would love to try, because man, was she fiery in that. And I think that her goal and kind of her job during this convention was to resonate with Trump's base. And, kind of resonate this general theme that a Biden victory would mark the end of the United States as we know it. Right? That is kind of what the more far right really believes this election's about. And she's kind of the voice for that. She really does emphasize that Democrats would cause a fundamental shift towards Marxism. And that's one of the tales of the night. Now, the reason that I'm adding Nikki Haley to the intro is because she is kind of the good cop to Kimberly Guilfoyle's bad cop message. And so I think Nikki Haley was strategically put in this convention to kind of add a contrast. She discusses how the country is better than racism in our past, and she has personal experience in doing so. And honestly, I applaud her for that because her story is special, and there are many millions of Americans who have that story. But that being said, I think this part is well placed because it tries to discredit the Democratic narrative that the United States needs to do more about systematic racism. And so if you put Nikki Haley's approach alongside Kimberly Guilfoyle's approach, it kind of makes sense. Nikki's discrediting the chaos on the left in the protests, saying, this is actually a great country. And then it follows with Kimberly Guilfoyle basically saying that this is about our right of life. This is about our willingness to continue to live in such a great country. And those two kind of play off of each other. And that's what this whole convention's about. It's talking about the state of America and playing off the fears of the other side. And, I honestly think there's some reason to what Nikki Haley says, where I don't think that we should only focus on the ghosts of our past, which some Democrats and especially the really far progressives want to do. But unfortunately, ironically, this convention is also playing on the ghosts of our past, but kind of on the other side. I wanted to start with those two videos just kind of to highlight, I think, the two narratives that are simultaneously occurring inside of the RNC this week. And, I didn't cover the DNC last week, mainly because, in all honesty, it was kind of just a bland and flawed convention, which you would expect from a pandemic, right? I didn't think there was anything new or crazy, and I think for the most part, it accomplished what it wanted to. And at the end of the day, I think Joe Biden's message was one of inclusion, unity, and kind of coming together. And so I just didn't really think there was much to really talk about. But after seeing this RNC one, I think it was worth to take some notes. And my first takeaway here is honestly that it seems like Americans are watching two completely different movies. And what I mean is that depending on which party you follow, and which candidate you want, your view of how the nation is doing right now is not even going to be similar to the other side. For example, you are a Republican who has been really only following maybe Trump and Fox News or OAN. And so imagine if you turned on the DNC, you would likely be appalled by the message in it. You may find it hard to believe that America still has the ghosts of our racist past. You may find it crazy that Trump is actually damaging some of the systems and institutions in our country. And you may find it appalling that people think that Trump didn't do a good job with the coronavirus. And now, on the same note, if you were a Democrat who mainly read The New Yorker and maybe watched CNN and MSNBC or whatever, you would probably be appalled by the first 2 nights of the GOP convention. As I mentioned earlier, it was kind of a mix of fear-mongering with hunky-dory messages about how great America is. And, like, for example, on the first night of the RNC, I was mind-blown by the continued rhetoric that Trump handled the virus well, and he brought the U.S. valuable time. It's just not true, right? Yes, he closed us off to China early, but then he wasted like a month condemning mask wearing and Fauci and all this other stuff. But that's the problem, is if you're a conservative, you're seeing a completely different narrative than a Democrat and vice versa. And so it's interesting. And so on night 1, I don't want to stick too much on the speakers. I'm not going to do, speaker by speaker, because that'll just take forever. But it was kind of a tale of the good, the bad, and the ugly. There was a little bit for everyone here. You had a little bit for Trump's base. You had a little bit for moderates, a little bit for the religious side. You kind of had something for everyone. So it started off with Charlie Kirk of Turning Point USA. And he kind of bashed both parties, but also kind of furthered the populist right-wing agenda that Trump pushes. And so that tells me that he is going to be kind of the future of wherever this Republican Party goes. Or at least that's my theory at this time. The problem here in the first night is that some of the guests and some of the themes that were displayed, I think, were more suitable for a Trump rally than for a national convention that is supposed to kind of unify both the extremes and the moderates in your base. And that, I think, kind of came to fruition when we saw that lovely St. Louis couple, with Mark and Patricia McCloskey. Do you remember they were the ones seen flaunting their guns when those protesters came through their property? And honestly, I think this was more of kind of a Trump rally, kind of dog whistle. And what it told me, unfortunately, is that if you're a wealthy white couple who doesn't like these protests, you can do whatever you want, and there's going to be people in America who think that's okay. So I'm not going to give them too much time, but I'm going to play just a little clip because I think these people have almost become kind of a propaganda piece, and I don't think it should be so that way.
What you saw happen to us could just as easily happen to any of you who are watching from quiet neighborhoods around our country.
Whether it's the defunding of police, ending cash bail so criminals can be released back out on the streets the same day to riot again, or encouraging anarchy and chaos on our streets. It seems as if the Democrats no longer view the government's job as protecting honest citizens from criminals, but rather protecting criminals from honest citizens.
So yeah, in theory, that message resonates, right? Good citizens being threatened by bad citizens, and Democrats don't care about protecting good citizens. Too bad it's out of context, and this couple acted out of line. And I've been seeing reports, too, that this couple, they had a record, they were ambulance chasers, and they were kind of flawed individuals themselves. So again, it's kind of taking this situation and misrepresenting what the protesters are. And there are bad apples inside of these protest movements. But again, it's misrepresenting it and scaring a lot of the people that watch this convention. Now, however, again, I've said there were not all bad narratives in this, and I actually saw some very good speeches in it as well. I liked a lot of Nikki Haley's, not all of it, but some of it, and like I'd shown in the beginning, there were some good parts. Also, I think Tim Scott was probably the best speech in actually maybe both nights that I'm covering here. I like Tim Scott, and I honestly think he did a good job. Now, I've heard people on the left critique Scott for even speaking at the convention, mainly because he seems to kind of be the voice for why systematic problems don't exist or are better. But I actually think his case is interesting, and I like the fact that he doesn't really mention Trump as much as just mentions that there is room for Black Americans inside of the conservative party. So let's take a listen.
You may be asking yourself, how does a poor Black kid from a single-parent household run and win in a race crowded with Republicans against a Thurman? Because of the evolution of the Southern heart. In an overwhelmingly white district, the voters judged me not on the color of my skin, but on the content of my character. We live in a world that only wants you to believe in the bad news, racially, economically, and culturally polarizing news. The truth is, our nation's arc always bends back towards fairness. We are not fully where we want to be, but I thank God Almighty, we are not where we used to be.
I honestly kind of wish I could play the whole speech, but it would take a while. But I do think there was a lot in that speech, and I picked that part out because I think he's providing a more sober stance on kind of where the country is. You know, it's optimistic in saying that we're definitely better off than where we were, but he's also acknowledging that there's still work to be done. And, you know, I applaud him for taking that stance. Unfortunately, he is in a party where maybe he's trying to do the best thing and some of his fellow senators are trying to do what's right, but the president, his rhetoric is different. And I think that's the big problem here. But I do like it. I do like what he says. So I'm not going to stay much more on the first night because it was kind of this cycle of, you know, optimism and well-spoken speakers mixed in with Trump family members and the Kimberly Guilfoyles just screaming fear. So I want to move on to the second night. And again, it kind of involves some interesting feel-good stories that once again made me think that everything is great in the country and that Trump is probably the best man ever. And, you know, like I was really fascinated. There were a lot of personal stories about references to Trump's compassion and character. Like you had all these, you know, these videos from farmers, police officers, the Navajo tribe. Like it was very fascinating. And all these people expressed how nice and compassionate and personal Trump is. And I'd believe it better if I actually saw this in practice, right? But unfortunately, that's not what happened. But night two, there were some interesting parts. And I'm going to kind of just go to the most important parts. So I think there was a very strong moment in night two right off the beginning. And that came when Trump pardoned Jon Ponder. He was a convicted bank robber who basically just turned his life around and founded Hope for Prisoners, which is kind of a re-entry program. And I was surprised because this man actually managed to humanize Trump in a way that even his own family members couldn't do in their speeches. And honestly, seeing Trump go up there and give the man his pardon was nice. And I'm going to applaud Trump for doing it because it was different than like when he pardoned Roger Stone or some of these other people. Like this was a man who deserved a pardon, and I'm glad he did it. So I will give Trump the benefit of the doubt there. Let's just take a look because it's something actually positive here.
So now I'd like to invite John's wife, Jamie, to join us as I grant John, I'm not sure you know this, a full pardon. So I don't know if you know that, Jamie. Come on over here. It's just an honor. And you have done incredible work.
Thank you, sir.
And all of Las Vegas and all of Nevada and all of every place in this country is very proud of you. The job you've done, bringing people back. And you're right, I was supposed to be there for 5 minutes. I stayed for an hour and a half because it was so interesting to me.
And I mean, honestly, it's clear that this was, you know, somewhat of a publicity stunt. But I got to be honest, when you're seeing Trump, you know, announce that he's going to pardon Mr. Ponder, and he gets teary-eyed, and you see him standing also next to this police officer, this FBI agent, who had actually arrested him, and now they're close friends. I think it does send somewhat of a message of unity that we may think police-citizen relations are bad, but maybe they're not that bad. And so I will say that was a part that actually made me leave feeling good about. I also thought that Melania did a good job because she was one of the only speakers who actually addressed her condolences for the over 170,000 Americans who have died from coronavirus. My big problem with the convention so far is that Republicans have basically said that Trump's handling of the pandemic was great, and they've seemed to kind of erase or just conveniently forget about all the death. And I think Melania did a good job there. I'm not going to show any videos for that. I'm going to keep moving. But also, I thought it was interesting because our friend Nick Sandman was back. And if you guys don't remember, last year he was one of those Covington Catholic high school kids who, you know, that media story made him look like he was looking down on that Native American protester. You know, the story was different. But they had this boy speak. He just graduated from high school, and he kind of talked about the state of the news media and how dangerous and toxic it is. He actually spoke quite eloquently and seemed very well spoken. But again, it kind of seems like Trump and his campaign were holding on to this culture war, and I don't even know why they brought this kid on. So yeah, interesting stuff. Now, the positives aside, I think the worst moment came from Mike Pompeo. I've read a lot of stuff that has said his speech was actually possibly illegal because it came from Jerusalem and it was during one of his diplomatic trips there, so it meant that taxpayer dollars were actually funding this. And the New York Times says that it felt like a gross politicization of American diplomacy and a sneering statement about how this administration views the laws that have bound their predecessors. And it's true. I mean, imagine if Obama had Hillary Clinton do this. Imagine if in 2012 we saw Hillary Clinton, speaking at the DNC from Jerusalem. That would be insane. Security, hotel, everything funded by taxpayers. The Tea Party and Republicans would have been all over it. And according to Brett Stevens, who is one of the conservatives at the New York Times, he says, in quotes, Mike Pompeo's speech from Jerusalem was in its way everything that's wrong with Trump's administration. It violated protocols and probably rules and put Pompeo's political interests ahead of the national interests, end quotes. And I think that's true. And it's very clear that obviously this is pandering to the evangelical religious base, right? Even though there's not a large amount of Jewish citizens who actually are kind of in Trump's base, the evangelical Christians really do support the state of Jerusalem. So the state of Israel. So this was very political. And another issue I kind of had with this entire evening is just kind of the hypocrisy here, right? Like there's this anti-nepotism message, especially when they're criticizing Hunter Biden and the Bidens and the Obamas and the Clintons. But then almost like a third of the speakers at this were Trump family members. Now, I know this is nothing too crazy because in 2016, the Trump family members also spoke there. And also at the same time, like we've seen other presidents have their family speak there, like the Obamas, the Bushes, the Clintons. Like it's nothing new, but there's just a little bit of a hypocritical stance there. And then Pence also says, Republicans are the party of Lincoln. But then again, they're kind of holding on to this cultural protection of the Confederate flag. So I didn't like that. And kind of my closing thoughts here is that I'll be back in a couple days to probably cover more of the RNC, but I do want to make it clear that Trump is good at PR and he's good at marketing and he's good at image. And that's why this, convention seems positive, high budget, like, your vote pretty much matters between life and death here. And it does a good job of painting Trump as the savior and Democrats as kind of the evil villains bringing down the nation. And it's not true, okay? I've read reports out of the New York Times and Politico that talk about how the GOP dropped their official platform kind of going into this. But I do kind of think the GOP has a platform, and they've kind of allowed Trump to be that platform. I think now it matters less about the actual policy, the conservative policies. Now it's about Trump. And that's kind of why we saw that it was less policy driven. It was more fear based. Okay, Trump is going to solve this. Trump's family is defending him. And that does worry me a little bit because I think they're doing a disservice to the nation by getting us all nervous about the others, about our fellow Americans. And they're not actually focusing on plans to get things done. So I'm going to be back later in this week to talk more about this. And I think it is some fascinating stuff. So please let me know. Am I overreacting? Is this the best convention ever? Are the Democrats crazy? Are the Republicans crazy? Did Trump do a good job? Let me know. You can find us on Facebook, iTunes, Twitch, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, all those things. Take care, and we'll be back tomorrow with a great episode on the paradox of tolerance. Take care.